right, well, we're going to get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kathleen Roland, serving as your interim senior minister, and I'm going to boast a little bit. I take credit for bringing Andrea here. Yeah. Reverend Dr. Andrea Johnson is known to some of you because she was a former intern. I don't remember how long ago. 2017-18 here at Unity Church. And she's gone on and has, this is part of her doctoral dissertation, or it is your doctoral dissertation, which I read and I thought was absolutely brilliant and important, and wanted to share that with you and with Unity Church. So as you know, this is the kickoff of the series, and this is in person. It will not be live streamed, but we are going to try and record it. And the other two sessions are the next two Tuesday nights from 6:30 to 8, I believe. Right. And we will have that Zoom link available. So do make sure that you tune into the rest of the story. So I just wanted to again welcome you, Andrea. Thank you for your hard work. I mean, this degree of scholarship is so important and so necessary. And I'm just delighted that you're here and able to share this with us. So without much further ado, I give you Reverend Dr. Andrea Johnson. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's just delightful to be back. I'm overwhelmed with like wonderful emotions and memories of being an intern here. And so it's great to be back. I've done many small groups in this room, so I feel like in some ways I'm coming home. So as you heard, since my internship, I spent 3 years in Bloomington as a minister down in Bloomington, Minnesota. And then I went back to get my Doctor of Ministry, and I'm affiliated with First Universalist Church as a community minister, but mostly what I'm doing right now is kind of this teaching. And my hope is to kind of go on the road with this work and teach it to congregants and ministers. So without further ado, oops. There we go. Here is the agenda for today. I thought we could do really quick introductions, just your name and your pronoun. I don't even know if we'll have time to like say what brought you here. Probably just your name, or maybe not introductions. I don't know. No introductions. Boy, I'm thinking it was like going to be 10 people. Okay, never mind. Welcome.
You're all fair name 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, too many people. This is so great. I'll give you a little bit of context for this workshop. I have a question for reflection. You can maybe turn to your neighbor. And then I'm going to kick this session off with the call to racial justice from our Unitarian and our Universalist heritage. So this will be a little history lesson. And then I have another question for you, and then some final thoughts. And then the next two sessions will really be where we dive into my dissertation work, and we'll talk about Martin Luther King and empirical process theology next week. And then we'll talk about Anthony Pinn, which is who is an African-American naturalistic humanist. So that is what we will do. That one. So let me give you a little context for my dissertation and this workshop. In 2020, this amazing report came out. It's the Widening of Circle of Concern. I encourage you to read it if you haven't already. It analyzed white supremacy culture in the Unitarian Universalist Association, and it looked at many aspects of our denomination. So our theology, the way we credential ministers, all like our governance, all of it. But specifically in the theology section, it says these things. It says addressing the problem of race in Unitarian Universalism has not been broadly seen as a theological mandate. And it says we have not invested in the theological resources that could have helped us meet the challenges of the 21st century. And its recommendation is that we articulate a theology of liberation, experimentation, and innovation grounded in our Unitarian Universalist principles and sources of inspiration. So my dissertation and this workshop seeks to make a contribution towards that devastating critique.
It's supposed to sound very good. know, it's not a great language.
Muffled? Okay. Oh, I doubt you could hear me. I mean,
Also recording it. Yeah, just a little bit more. At the back, okay. Sorry to interrupt.
that's
you.
okay.
All right, let's try that.
How's that? Is that any better? Okay, good. Okay, so my dissertation and this workshop, I offer UU or UU adjacent theological trajectories that can deeply ground our racial justice work. And here's the 4 I write about: the personalist theology of Martin Luther King, radical empirical process theology, African-American naturalistic humanism, and feminist liberation theology. Each of these 4 trajectories offers a manner of imagining the divine, sacred, God, grounded in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, and each of them calls us to the racial justice work reflected in the 8th principle and Article 2. I believe that the variability, complementarity, and even disparity between these trajectories and resources are necessary for the pluralistic ethos of Unitarian Universalism, and most importantly, critical for our racial justice work. And finally, I want to say these are not the only 4 ways to ground racial justice work. This is just a starting point. And what I do in my dissertation and what I would love to do in my work is call on my colleagues and other people to add to this body of work. I would love to create a theology collaborative where like-minded folks that are interested in theology gather, reflect, and add to this body of work so that we can really address this critique in the widening circle of concern. So let's talk about theology. Yay. What do I mean by theology? Theology traditionally has meant God talk or the study of God, and it's usually broadened to include the study of church doctrine and dogmas. But as a non-creedal, non-dogmatic faith, such as UU, theology can be broadened to mean critical and creative reflection on the basic principles of Unitarian Universalism. And our principles are not dogmas and doctrines, but rather diverse teachings and paths, some of which are atheistic, humanist, theistic, or non-theistic. Theology inquires into the nature of ultimate reality. Now, I'm using ultimate reality, that's a philosophical term, but I'm using it because it's broader than just saying God. Ultimate reality is, just think of it as what's the really real in the universe. Some people call that God, some people call it the sacred mystery, or even nature itself. Theology also aims at truth. Theologians make normative claims about what is true and untrue, what is right and wrong, what is life-giving and death-dealing, what is just and unjust, what is beautiful and grotesque. By normative, I mean we have opinions about, in our faith, we would answer those things differently than perhaps an evangelical Christian would. That's what I mean by normative. Theology asks the deepest and most important, serious, and difficult questions human beings can ask themselves. Things like, does existence have any ultimate meaning? Is a fundamental trust to be found amidst the fears, anxieties, and terrors? What's the origin of meaning of life? How should we live our lives? What lies beyond death? What is the human condition? What are our responsibilities to our neighbors? What's the meaning of the good? So in response to these profound existential questions, every religion in its symbols and practices, its myths and narrative, presents a fundamental vision of the meaning of human existence within history and the cosmos. As a theologian myself, I wager that our UU faith offers authentic responses to these profound existential questions. And one more slide on theology, and then we'll move on. So what's the purpose of theology? Theology articulates a sense of meaning and ethical orientation. It helps us envision the world we so long to bring into being. And I think theology also has a public role. It can be public-facing, focusing on the relationship between religious faith and public life, contributing to the well-being of the world, And good theology speaks a prophetic word of liberation to those who reside on the margins of society. And my favorite theologian, Sally McFaig, one of my favorites, she says that theologies should be judged on their fruitfulness for living, their ability to light up human existence in profound ways, their compatibility with contemporary knowledge and science, and their empirical fit. So at the end of this workshop, I would love to know if you think the theologies I'm offering do just this. Do they light up existence? Do they help us ground our racial justice work? And then finally, I'm going to quote James Luther Adams, Unitarian's most famous 20th century theologian. He says that the unexamined faith is not worth having, for it can be true only by accident. A faith worth having is a faith worth discussing and testing. I think that's what we do here in Unitarian Universalism. So maybe we can take 5 or so minutes, turn to your neighbor perhaps, and I'm wondering from what I just shared, what might resonate with your own understanding of theology? Do you have a theology? What do you understand theology to be? How does your theology ground your living? Maybe answer any one of those questions, and then we can maybe have some time to do, I know there's a lot, but maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and then we can do a little share out. So just turn to your neighbor and talk about theology for a moment. Folks wanting a little bit more time? No? Okay. I'm wondering if we can call people back together. It seems like y'all are having a good conversation. I'm just noticing that this mic doesn't, it's not a roving mic, but I sure would love to hear it from a few folks. What resonates for theology? Does anybody want to share something that comes to mind? I know it's an intimidating word.
Well, you only gave us 10 minutes.
I'm sorry, I know. Maybe there's a sermon that really resonated with you from that you've heard, or something that, you know, touches you, or that's okay. If you don't want to share, that's fine. Go ahead.
I think Claire and I both agree that we came here because we hope to learn more about Unitarian theology and how it relates to racial justice, like what are some of those meanings, and also what our church can do more in bringing racial equity and racial justice to action.
Perfect. You're in the right place. Great. I'm going to give you a little history lesson. Okay, here's a little history lesson. I'm going to talk about I know there's a lot of words here. It's just really hard to summarize, but I'll do my best here. So early Unitarians, in the name of both scripture and reason, rejected the Trinity and the Christology that undergirds it. Christology is just a fancy word for what Christ means, who Jesus is, what Christ means. The Protestant reformers, in the eyes of many early Unitarians, such as Martin Luther and John Calvin, did not go far enough in their reforms. So when Unitarians read the Bible, they did not find evidence of the Trinity. So instead, they affirm the unity of God, one source for the divine, one object of homage, adoration, and love. I think this is a quote from William Ellery Channing. One original and fountain to whom we may refer all good, in whom all of our powers and affections may be concentrated, and whose lovely and venerable nature may pervade all of our thoughts. Transcendentalists like Emerson went so far as to substitute nature for the Bible as one source of revelation. So the unity of God, basically what that means is that you don't say that Jesus is God. So you affirm the humanity of Jesus. Now, what I want to point out is that the early Unitarians, such as the Socinians who lived in Poland, still believed that Jesus was sent by God and performed miracles. He lived so transcendentally pure as that none either before or after equalized him, so that he came next to God himself in holiness. However, he was still fully human. Now we know that as Unitarians progressed, sort of the Christology went lower and lower till I would say many Unitarians now believe that Jesus is a prophet like Muhammad or Buddha or Martin Luther King or Dorothy Day. But I just want to make it clear that Jesus was, in the beginning, Jesus was still exalted a bit. So what are some of the ethical implications of this Unitarian thought of the oneness of God? William Ellery Channing in 1828 says that the idea of God sublime is the idea of our own spiritual nature purified and enlarged to infinity. In ourselves are the elements of divinity. God then does not sustain a figurative resemblance to man. It is the resemblance of a parent to a child, the likeness of a kindred nature. So what he is saying is that he affirms that all of us are worthy because we belong to something greater than ourselves that connects us to one another. And I think this can lay the foundation of our first principle, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Theodore Parker, in the mid-1800s, defines in the sermon about what is transient in Christianity, which he says are doctrines and rituals, and what is permanent, the moral ideal of love taught by Jesus. His faith leads him to work tirelessly on the abolition of slavery. This is how he loved God and neighbor. He followed the teachings of Jesus and worked to end slavery. I've got a few more examples. Frances Ellen Watkins Harper, the woman at the top, was an African-American member of the First Unitarian Church in Philadelphia. She embarked on a career as a traveling speaker on the abolitionist circuit. Her faith led her to help slaves escape through the Underground Railroad, and she wrote frequently for anti-slavery newspapers. She was also a wonderful poet. And then finally, again, I mentioned James Luther Adams before. He's probably the most well-known Unitarian theologian of the 20th century. He talks about God being the inescapable, commanding reality that sustains and transforms all meaningful existence. This reality finds its focus in the exercise of freedom that works for justice in human communities. Adams urges us to place our confidence and loyalty in something more powerful and commanding than just ourselves. Human dignity then derives from participating in this community, this being, this freedom, this creativity. Kind of another way of saying we're made in God's image. And one of my favorite parts of James Luther Adams is his idea of the prophethood of all believers. He really wants to help the church, the Unitarian Church, become a prophetic church. A prophetic church concerns itself with the historical struggle for justice and decency. A prophetic church interprets the signs of the time and shows concern for the shape of things to come. The prophetic liberal church, he says, is the church in which all members share the common responsibility to attempt to foresee the consequences of human behavior, both individual and institutional, with the intention of making history in place of merely being pushed around by it. So he wants us to go make history. Only through the propheticism of all believers can we together foresee doom and mend our ways. To me, that feels so prescient right now with our faltering democracy. I think he would be urging us all to get really involved in the upcoming election and voting efforts. So this is, again, what I'm trying to do in this workshop. This is what I'm trying to do in my dissertation, is help us remember our ancestors, be grounded by them, be inspired by their words, because we have a rich history. We have a wonderful, rich history. And I think Unity Church is a prophetic church. So now let's turn to historic universalist theology. Universalism affirmed the universal love of God and its soteriological implications. Soteriological is just a fancy way of saying salvation. So universalism affirmed the ultimate salvation of all. The true meaning of the gospel is that in the fullness of time, all of creation will be restored to harmony with God. Now, the early universalists argued about would there be some punishment or not, but eventually they agreed that all would be restored. Kind of like Unitarianism, I think that that eventually morphed into salvation in this life. But early universalism, just to be clear, did remain Trinitarian. They accepted original sin and the atonement through the death of Jesus. But in the 18th and 19th century, a more radical form of universalism emerges, which proclaimed that all punishment for sin was confined to this life. So one of our most famous universalists is Hosea Ballou, and he argued that God is not wrathful but loving. He rejected Calvinism's predestination and said that Christ suffered for humanity, not instead of them. Sin is finite, not infinite. Therefore, an infinite sacrifice is not required. I love how reason shows up in both Unitarianism and Universalism. If you think about a human life as maybe 75, 85 years, if you sin in this life, why would you be punished forever, all in eternity? Like, that doesn't really make sense. And so they didn't think so either, and said that the purpose of the atonement in Jesus's life is to really inspire us to love God and neighbor. Well, that's a little bit about universalism. This is James Freeman Clarke, 5 points to a new theology. I really kind of like this because he is point by point arguing with Calvinism's 5 tulip, it's called, if anyone ever went to seminary. It's sort of the total depravity, limited atonement, unconditional election, these kind of things from Calvinism. And James Freeman Clarke said, no, we're going to have a new, more optimistic theology. So his 5 points are the fatherhood of God. Jesus thought that God is love. The brotherhood of man. If men are children of the same father, then they are all brethren. I like this. The point of the Good Samaritan story is that all people are siblings and we should treat each other as such. The leadership of Jesus. So follow Jesus's teachings of love. The religion of Jesus, meaning his teachings, trumps the religion about Jesus, which is all the doctrines and history that came after. Salvation by character, instead of this, only some are saved and some are damned. James Freeman Clarke said, the highest peace and joy of which the soul is capable is inward goodness, love of God in the heart, going out into life and character. And then continuity of human development, upward progress forever. Now this has kind of, this idea has been shown to be a little bit idolatrous and doesn't take into account systemic evil. We know that the universe does not bend toward justice on its own. We have to make it so. But that was his 5th point. Go ahead.
Is this saying that the Gospels are the only true and that the books of the disciples are not true. They're making that argument, that those are the religions about Jesus.
Yes, that's,
Because those are the stories that other people have told
Told
about
about
Jesus, where the Gospels are the only ones where he actually is known to be saying those things. Is that
right. I don't know if he was that specific, but you're onto the right idea. That really his teachings, I mean, through the Gospels are the most important, not what centuries, Augustine said 500 years later and Paul said after he was gone. I mean, Jesus, if you think about it, Jesus was a Jew. He didn't come to start a new religion. He came to reform Judaism. So Christianity starts with the view that Jesus is the Christ. Jesus is the Son of God. And I think James Freeman Clarke was saying, no, Jesus is not the Son of God. Jesus, the teachings are more important. So what are the ethical implications of universalism? The universal view of divine love and grace gives rise to an ethic of love and compassion. Olympia Brown, she was the first female minister to be ordained. She talked about an all-loving God that will not damn any to hell. And again, this also lays the groundwork for the inherent worth and dignity of all human beings, our first principle. So we kind of see this overlap between Unitarianism and Universalism in affirming the inherent worth and dignity of all. Clarence Skinner, writing a little bit later, really starts to move Universalism in this social direction. He redefines sin as not just personal and individual, but also systemic and structural. He argued for salvation in this life. He says, save the soul and transform society. He defended a universalist version of the social gospel, de-emphasizing stress on the afterlife and focusing on a practical philosophy that promoted social engagement and social justice. And one of our Unitarian publishing is named after him, Skinner House Books. So I'm going to give you some time to chat a little bit. I have a couple of more questions. Maybe you turn to your neighbor and we'll do a little talk back again. How does your Unitarian Universalist faith call you to justice work? Or what inspires you from our historic faith tradition? Or even here at Unity, what inspires you to work for justice? Are there initiatives that you are part of here at the church? This is like
I never saw a black person in the church. They're reached out. Any of my dads. Yeah. You know, and I thought, yeah. About everybody had I never thought about it. I didn't feel that at all. And then I got some thoughts. By the way, I think picture. I'm not sure what we're doing. The picture.
Looks like people are maybe ready to share. I'm gonna give you some more time to share into the larger room. I really would like to hear your answer to these questions, and I think the group would too. So would someone like to share?
Yeah, I reversed it. I didn't come to justice work because of Unitarianism. I was doing justice work and enjoying the congregation.
That's awesome. That's great.
So I don't know what may or may not enhance it, but it was clearly different paths. I was explaining to the folks here that I came out of my dad was an old, Hubert Humphrey labor guy. And he grew up in a family on that sense. So the path works in different ways, I think, on social justice.
My father's background was as a Roosevelt Democrat. He was at the Democrat convention in 1948 when the Dixiecrats walked out and Humphrey delivered his speech. But none of my father's Wisconsin Synod Lutheran background did one damn for social justice. They never talked about it. They never did it. The congregation was white and Christ was white with blue eyes. So he learned his social justice from politics, not from religion or any theology that came close to his life.
I'd like to change that for Unitarian Universalism and help deepen our theology. It's okay that you found like justice first and then came here, but it'd be nice to, do you feel like your Unitarian faith keeps you going or sustains you on your journey? Nice to see that. I'm not going to be in the spot, but who else would like to share?
I often come back to the 7 principles, just because that's. Could you speak just a little louder? I often come back to the 7 principles because, like, I wasn't really raised believing in God, and so that's what I have for kind of guidance in sales ethics and stuff. But I think that the idea of universal salvation and creating heaven on earth, or whatever you want to say, similar stuff, that definitely made my mind open and ready to hear about prison abolitionism when that entered my kind of political sphere. So I think it did go, like, for me, it did go from like theology to politics for me. Like that was the order that.
Nice, all the way to prison abolition. That's great.
I don't think of so much justice work, but I think my work is welcome and curious work.
Awesome.
Like I'm around a lot of, if I'm believing everybody is running, valuable, and then I'm around somebody with a disability. I'm around I work with a lot of people with them. Then getting to know them as a person, not a label, and then working with a lot of people from other countries and stuff, just trying to welcome them, get to know them, be curious. That's part of, I don't really call it justice work, but
No, but it is welcome.
Yeah, and that I kind of grew up with my friends, welcome to all kinds of strangers. Or my friends, my family, that's what they did. But then this community supports it, so that kind of happened before I was ever part of Unitarian, but then it just aligned and it encourages and inspires.
That's wonderful. If, for those of you that may not have heard, she's talking about welcome work and
Curious.
curious
It's
work.
like promoting understanding. So that's why.
That's her work, promoting understanding. It sounds a lot like the inherent worth and dignity of all people, that you're
Yeah.
really, that you really take that to heart, and that forms some of the basis of your welcome work. Are there other thoughts? Anything anybody else would like to share? Go ahead.
For me, it's just being around, being in the community and around it, and it's like people pay attention to what they see, and people are influenced by who's around them, and the fact that there's this living, breathing community of people that supports and encourages the values that I have. It's like a whole lot easier to, not think, to not feel like we're the only one thinking something or feeling something, and and I mean, there's a political dimension of, I've always been active in various democratic things, but that doesn't have the community. I mean, you can have moments of community during an election or something, but it doesn't hold together organically. But this way, you just keep being reminded of what you care about.
That's great. Sounds like Unity is doing a good job of supporting one another and inspiring as well. That's wonderful. Go ahead.
Claire and I both, I'm picking on Claire.
Yeah.
Because she's took better notes and was a better student of Unitarianism than I was. We both grew up here, and I'm sort of coming to awareness that maybe my social justice lean and bend and activism is rooted in this church, but she's pretty clear that that's grounded in that her training as a Unitarian and Universalist as a kid through here really influenced her. I've sort of always, for me, I thought I've always been oriented toward justice, and I've done that work professionally and as a student and as a volunteer and as an activist in a lot of different ways. And I always just thought that was the thing I was supposed to do. I didn't really ever question where it came from. I just thought that was the right thing. And now I'm here to learn about how Unitarianism, that maybe I was more greatly influenced by Unitarianism than I thought it was.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. Oh, yes, Ruth.
I think one of the things that really is very unique to our tradition is the fact that we say religion is about learning, that our fourth principle I think is seek the truth, to try to be in a constant posture of learning. And when I think of racial justice, the white folk anyway, it's about learning, like really trying to open our perceptions into that, oh, wait a minute, this is not what I thought it was. And that is a grounding force. And even getting the privilege to talk in my small group, that this idea of being able to be an open-hearted seeker and learner in a diverse group, a justice-seeking group, is a really important thing. And we can certainly ground ourselves in that theology, which it is.
Great. Well, I just have one more slide. This is just a slide that kind of moves us from historic Unitarian Universalism to some of the things that are calling us right now. The eighth principle, I'm not sure if this church got involved with that, but it was a movement of congregations, I think over 300 have affirmed it, but it says, we, the member congregations of the UUA, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism. Many congregations have affirmed the eighth principle. Now that's kind of wrapped up into our Article 2 work, but Article 2, which is, this is going to be our new graphic that centers, really puts love at the center. And these are our other values: interdependence, justice, generosity, pluralism, transformation, and equity. And then blue, Black Lives of Unitarian Universalism. That was formed about 6 or 7 years ago as a group of Black Unitarian Universalists supporting each other spiritually, but they also are doing justice work with white folks and themselves. And so I think we can, as white folks, we can financially support blue, and if we're Black, we can join blue if that helps us find a community of fellow travelers and journeyers. And then, as I said, Article 2 highlights justice as one of our core values and asks us to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. So here's some calls from our current Unitarian Universalist voices. So that just brings me to next session. So I'm kind of piloting. This is the first time I've done this workshop. I didn't realize it would go quite as fast. I didn't realize there'd be quite so many people. So I thought there would be maybe more time would have been taken up introducing ourselves and that kind of thing. But I bet you won't mind ending a little early on a chilly night. But let me just talk about our next session is Tuesday, January 23rd. It is from 6:30 to 8. And I think you have that information somewhere. The topic is going to be Martin Luther King and the pantheism of Bernard Loomer. That'll get a little bit dense, but I promise to sketch it out for you, and it's really worth sticking it out because I think it's beautiful theology that can really ground ourselves. And there's some optional reading. I'm guessing most of you maybe are not interested, but if you are, chapter 2 and 3 are on Martin Luther King and pantheism. And if you would like to read that ahead of time, I will gladly send you my dissertation. And then the next session is chapters 2 and 3, wait. Yeah, 1 and 2, I did that wrong, 1 and 2. Anyway, 1 and 2 for next week, 3 and 4 for the third session, if you are interested in kind of getting a sneak peek. And yes, we are sending around a sheet. You can put your email address, and I was going to print out like 20 copies, but my dissertation is 150 pages and it was going to cost like hundreds of dollars at UPS. So I just couldn't do it. I'm sorry. I would have loved to have just handed some out, but it's just too big. So I will send you, literally, I will send it, tomorrow morning or tonight. So you have a whole week if you want to read it. And it's okay if you just kind of skim it. And if you don't read it at all, it's okay. I'm going to unpack it. So it's just there if you're interested.
Are you recording these sessions?
I am recording them. So if you miss one, Laura will figure out how to tell you where it is. We can put it on my YouTube channel or something like that. So that is all. Yes.
What do you mean by pantheism? I mean, that's.
Oh, yes. Okay. Well, it's hard to unpack, but Bernard Loomer is, he was a late convert to Unitarian Universalism. He was writing in the late 70s, and he wrote this essay called The Size of God. And the big thing with pantheism is that pantheism means that God is not just all good. If we say that God and the world are the same, well, the world has creative forces and destructive forces, beauty and ugliness. And so what does it mean to glorify or honor or place a God that is not all good, a God that is ambiguous at the center of our lives? And how might that ground our justice commitments? And I will unpack that for you next week as best I can in an hour and a half, along with Martin Luther King. But I think there's some really richness in there. So hang with me.
As you've explored the way that Unitarian Universalism informs some of our past and present responses to the work of justice, You know, are there ways in which you've been particularly moved by that inspiration? And are there ways that you've been maybe even disappointed sometimes about?
With pantheism specifically, or any of them? Oh, Martin Luther, our history. Well, I think what I point out in my King chapter is that universalism fell far short of its like true implications of universal love and justice. I would say, like, we could have done more work for racial justice and slavery, and we fell short, I think, of meeting our goals. But I mean, that's most denominations. The progress, the onward and upward forever got us in trouble a little bit too. I think we can be seen as sort of a theology for like wealthy people and intellectual people, and sort of just seeing the progress onward and upward, and not really, like Ruth was saying, not really understanding oppression and structures and systemic evil. And a theology of sin. I think Unitarian Universalists don't often take sin seriously. That's not something I cover a lot here, but I think that's my professor, who I love dearly, has already outlined my next book, I think. And I think that's something I would put in my next, I think my next project, I'm offering, like, these are 4 theological trajectories. I think the work I would like to do is, what is Andrea Johnson's theology of racial justice? How would I put all that together and answer those questions? I'm not sure if I'm going to do that, but I would like to, maybe as like the next thing. But this project is more about, we're so diverse and so pluralistic. I want to kind of give something to everyone, for everyone. So, but pantheism, I think, has spiritual implications when we orient ourselves. Anyway, we'll get into that next week. You'll see how I think it can really help. Oh yeah, you can. I mean, it's only 8:07. Yeah, does anybody have that? That's true. Does anybody have any final questions or thoughts or anything? Yeah, feel free.
I had the question, I hadn't heard this before. Maybe I misheard. Did you say, well, repeat what you said about the UU's belief about Christ? Is Christ a God or a prophet? Did you say that they lean toward just being a prophet?
Yes, I would say definitely historic Unitarianism. I mean, that was what they were rejecting. Jesus is not God. If we have 2 or 3 sources for God, that's like diluting our center, our adoration. So yes, and they read the Bible. They also did it on the basis of scripture, or of reason. They looked at the Bible and they said, we don't see evidence that Jesus thought he was God, or we don't see evidence of the Trinity in his teachings and writings. And so that's where the Unitarian label comes from. So yeah, that was pretty radical.
Yeah, I was about to go down a rabbit hole with my question.
That's okay.
All right, how much of that tradition dates from the Arian controversy?
Oh, it does, all the way back to the Arian controversy. Yeah. Here's the thing with all this theology, like I could do a 3-part series on just Unitarian history and a 3-part series on.
Which is why I didn't want to go down.
Yeah, but you're right. It dates all the way back to the Arians back in 300. I can't remember it off the top. What is it, Ruth? Like 300s or something. 325 or. But yeah, and Michael Servetus in Spain. Calvin burned him at the stake for his refusal to say that Jesus was God. So yeah, this thought has been around in Christian history.
Does anybody want to know what the Arian controversy was?
Yes, sure.
I warned you it was a rabbit hole.
See, I can't remember. Can you?
Well, I mean, it's basically it's basically that.
An Alexandrian priest, Arius, got in, I believe, am I right, at 225 or thereabouts. Well, there was a great controversy at the time before the canon And orthodoxy was created in the Roman Church. or
Right.
What was in there about whether there was, Jesus was part of the Trinitarian, or whether Jesus was just infused from God
Yes,
as as you said, the element, the super prophet, if you will.
right.
And
Was he of the same substance as God? The same substance,
I didn't want to go down
That's-
that rabbit hole.
the same substance, yeah.
Wikipedia seems to have a pretty good analysis of it, so if you want. They're pretty much quoting everything the same.
But for what it was worth, at much of the time, the Arians were perhaps more predominant over the Trinitarians for a long time.
I know, Christian history, I think it's really interesting. These controversies, they seem so foreign to us now with our hindsight and our reason. They seem kind of silly, but they weren't. These were big issues that
People killed each other.
people killed and died over these controversies. You know, think of communion. Is it the blood and the body, or is it just infused with the blood and the body? I mean, there's all. Anyway,
So it's like the national secret request outside, causing damage.
so the sign up sheet's still going around, or did it go around? Oh, great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I'm just blown away by this attendance. Thank you so much.
Okay, I think I'll be here next Wednesday.